You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating all things Jewish.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
First of all, it's thrilling to be able to sit with you, and you and your family have made contributions to America for 2 generations now and more, and so it is an honor to have you. Thank you for joining us on Shalom TV.
Well, I'm glad to be on Shalom TV. As I was telling you, Mark, I've done, as you said, right many interviews, but I've never been on Shalom TV, so this is a first, and I look forward to it.
Okay. In a moment, I want to ask you about a couple of issues, but first, obviously, on Shalom TV, your own personal story is just so fascinating. Your middle name is Felix.
Correct.
Okay, you had a grandfather, your mother's father.
Correct.
Your mother's Hattie.
Yeah, Henriette, but she goes by Etty.
Okay, Eddie. And she had a father named Felix.
Right.
And the story that has now become sort of legendary in the Jewish community is that you, George Allen, the son of George Allen, who of course was a legendary football coach, and someone, as I'm growing up, your father is a hero. But in any case,
not if you're a Giants fan.
by the way, you follow professional sports, right?
Yeah, of course.
Even though you hate the other side, there is a degree of respect, isn't there?
For most teams, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Not every one of them.
But there was a lot of respect for your father.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Oh, you do. You respect
Yes.
your opponents. You definitely
Exactly
do.
right. Okay, so
Well,
lo and
anyway,
behold, the story is that one day you hear a rumor that you are, in fact, the son of a Jewish grandfather, which would make your mother Jewish, and you do ask your mother, what's the story here?
Right.
First of all, can you describe that moment for us, that literal moment when you talked to your mother?
It ended up being very emotional, but it was a really innocent question because there was this assertion. They said, well, George Allen's hiding his Sephardic, Portuguese Sephardic Jewish heritage. I've learned how to say Sephardic. And so I was out in California. It was in August, and I said, hey, Mom, because I knew my mother was French, Italian, and had a little Spanish. And so I had generally dismissed the Jewish aspect of it. I said, well, maybe I can add Portuguese to it because from Spanish, Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. And she then told me that my grandfather, Felix, my middle name honors him, Lombroso, was Jewish. And I looked up from the table. I was eating breakfast, and I looked up, and she was shaking. She was in tears. And before she told me, she said, you swear on Pop-Up's head, that's what we called my grandfather, that you don't tell anyone. And that's just the pledge of secrecy for the Allen family. I said, sure, Mom, sure. And then I said, why haven't you told us this? And she said, she lived in fear. This is the reality. As the Nazis, my mother, probably to make this all make some sense, is that my grandfather and my mother are from Tunisia, that's North Africa. And during World War II, the Nazis rousted my grandfather out of bed and incarcerated him in the dark of night. And my mother had told us that, and I didn't know it was because, and I'm not sure it was because of his religious beliefs or whether it's because he was part of a pathetic French resistance to the Nazis who occupied North Africa. Nonetheless, my mother lived in all these years in this fear. The scars still hurt the person who gave me birth, and she thought that the best way to protect her babies was to conceal this Jewish heritage. Now,
what happened to Felix, your grandfather?
He lived through the war. I knew my grandfather. I even visited him in 6th grade when he was living in Paris. Once France gave up Tunisia, he left Tunisia. He was a businessman. He was a wine and olive oil importer and so forth. And they went to Paris, and I visited him there. My brother, Greg, the second oldest in our family, was actually born in Tunis. It was still French then.
But Governor, even when you visited your grandfather, he must not have been living as a Jew.
Right, right. And in fact, that's what's surprising to me. My mother was confirmed in the Anglican church at some point in her young life, but I assumed that they were Christian, but thinking back on it, I said, well, there wasn't any Star of Davids, there weren't any crosses. No one ever said anything one way
How
or the
were
other.
you raised?
We were raised Presbyterian. My father was raised Catholic. My mother Anglican, I suppose. We were all raised in the Presbyterian church, and in our family, all Protestants of various sorts.
So how did you feel personally when all of a sudden your mother tells you that her father, and that makes her a Jew, and because you're born to a Jewish mother, from the Jewish people's perspective, you're also a Jew. How did it make you feel?
Well, the way my wife describes it is it opened up like a treasure box that we didn't know ever existed. And one of my brothers is a very religious Christian. His view was he was closer to God. For me, I had Thomas Jefferson's seat in the House of Delegates. And so the concept of religious freedom was one that I always thought was an enlightened philosophy. It became much more than that to me. It became an understanding, very personal, that here's my mother who lived all these years in this fear, and the scars and it's the way she was shaking when she told me it in her tears, and she says, "Do you still love me?" I said, "Of course I do, Ma." And she was worried that she said, "Well, you can't tell anyone." I said, "Why not? Why not? We gotta tell everyone." "No, you can't tell them."
Why do you think she didn't want you to tell?
Because
what was she afraid of, Governor?
Anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And she says, "Well, they won't like me anymore." I said, "Ma, they're going to like you. Why wouldn't they like you?" And I'm not going to mention some of their friends. And she says, "Well, so-and-so, they tell Jewish jokes." I said, "Well, I've never heard them tell Jewish jokes, but gee, Ma, it's not going to matter. Don't tell anyone. You can't tell anyone." And I said, "Oh, goodness." And so I kept my vow to my mother it was about a couple weeks, and every day I'd be saying, when am I going to be released from this vow to my mother at her funeral? This story needs to be told. And so in the midst of the campaign in 2006, I finally called her. I said, "Ma, we need to let people know." And I had to get her to call my brother Bruce, so I would not be the one breaching that promise I made to her. And I think it's been great for our whole family.
She did relent.
Yeah, oh yeah, finally.
And she gave you her blessing to say the truth.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and then then there was such an issue about all of this.
Why
and
do
some
you
of
think
the
that was?
And some of the media were at her home, and she lives alone, and she doesn't have any dogs or security or anything. And she says, "See, this is why. What are they going to do? Put stars of Judah on us?" And she said, "This is why." Exactly why, to vindicate somewhat her fears. For our family, though, it has just opened up so much. And now when my mother's with our children, she's still alive. And I was worried all of this was going to kill her. It just really, she thought it was hurting us and all this. I said, "No, Ma, it's not. It's good." Sure, there's some anti-Semitism there that makes us stronger, makes us more resolved. That whenever that ugly head of bigotry or racism or anti-Semitism rises up, it's important that people deplore it. Otherwise, people might think it's condoned. And so with our children, we make sure that whenever she's around, we just ask her questions. She opens up, and it's fantastic for our whole family.
My understanding is that your father did know.
I guess my father passed away on New Year's Eve, 1990. I assume he knew. I don't know. Obviously, I didn't know until 5.5 years ago.
Now, you've had a long and profound career in politics. When this became known for sure, and then you went public with it as well, has it in any way come back to bite you? Has anti-Semitism or any negative reaction because now George Allen, who again, the name resonates not only because, and people should know, you served in many offices in the state of Virginia. You have already served a full term in the United States Senate as a senator for Virginia, and now you're running to win a seat back again. Did in any way, being a Virginian, and now all of a sudden George Allen and George Allen's family is Jewish, has it in any way come back to hurt you?
Not that I can determine. It may have been a motive for those saying it. And I've heard my wife, in the midst of that campaign at a football game, saw someone go by an Allen for Senate sign, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's that Jew boy," and that's what my wife heard. So there is anti-Semitism. It's also opened up not just for our own family. It's opened up a lot of folks who will whisper to me similar situations that they went through. And I was in the Senate at the time, and I remember the consistent thing from Eric Cantor, Joe Lieberman, and Norm Coleman was "Welcome to the tribe." They said the exact same thing, and Norm Coleman said, "Well, we had to change our name to Coleman when our family came here because they're worried about their business and whether they would get business because of anti-Semitism." But it has really made me more sympathetic to a lot of people who are oppressed, not just because of their religious beliefs, but maybe it's racism and others. There was one woman in Southwest Virginia who said, "Hey, my whatever relative was Jewish as well," and so forth. She's whispering this to me. I said, "Oh, that's interesting," and so forth. She says, "But don't tell anyone." I said, again, there's people still alive, and there is anti-Semitism. There's no question about it. But I think we should be even more resolved and stronger, and don't flinch, and don't be timid, and don't get weak-kneed. Go forward, and I'm proud of our heritage.
You were brought up, you say, as a Presbyterian.
Yes.
Okay. That's your religious soul in a way. You now have a heritage that links you to the Jewish people. And I don't know how much you've now gone into this, but there is within the Jewish world a paradox. We do have a religious tradition called Judaism. In Hebrew, the word Torah is used. But primarily, what the Jews are a people. We are a family with family members who live all over the world, and we have a place, a home called the State of Israel. But it is primarily an identity of peoplehood and family. In addition, I assume you have maintained a religious tradition as a Presbyterian.
Right.
I want to know if in any way you feel inside yourself, Governor, a link to the Jewish people. Has that happened for you yet?
In what respect? You're asking a profound question. I spoke at a group, the Lubavitch.
The Lubavitch.
I don't even pronounce it correctly.
No, you did very well.
Regardless. And it was a very important speech. They wanted me, it was much longer than our interview here, on this revelation to us. And then they had me blow a horn. Fortunately, I was able,
shofar,
yeah,
yes.
the shofar, which I have on the mantle in my office. And I was able to blow it.
Good for you.
It wasn't a really great sound. Nonetheless, it made a sound.
Then you
And
succeeded.
that night, after it, I had the best dreams. I felt I was in another realm. It was very surreal. The next one, I did feel, I don't know if it's whether it's a transformation, but it was a feeling that I had shared with others rather than just our own family and the internal aspects, shared it with others. And the kindness of folks at this big event. It was in Reston, Virginia. It was a national event. It did have a profound feeling on me, and you don't want to say, gosh, it's a dream, but it just was a different dream than everyone has dreams. But that night after that, it was almost an exaltation to it. And while I am a Protestant, we go to a Methodist church, and I like Baptist and Presbyterian churches, and I like preachers who motivate and inspire people. There still is that relationship with people who are Jewish, as I said, some folks who are practicing the Jewish faith say welcome to the tribe. And it's not as if I hadn't been aware of any of this. When I was governor, we created the Virginia-Israel Partnership, and for educational, cultural, and economic ties with Virginia.
Have you been to Israel?
Yes, several times. In fact, first when I was governor. And I also thought that the best museum I've ever been to is the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And when I was governor, there were church burnings. Black churches were being burned, and they're trying to find out who was doing it. And so I went, President Clinton was president at the time, and we had a meeting, because this was primarily in Virginia, North Carolina, and some other southern states. While I was up there, I went to the Holocaust Museum. And when you go through that, it's introspective. Sure, there's the history and the military actions, and you realize that people did know what was going on. in World War II. It wasn't when they got to Auschwitz or any of the camps that all of a sudden they said, gee, they're exterminating, they're finding out about the Holocaust then. No, they knew about Kristallnacht. It's on the headlines of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And maybe there was just something in me when going through it. There was only a little bit in there about Tunisia. It was just a little bit. And I remember saying, gee, I wonder what they're thinking about this in Tunisia. I guess this wasn't much of an issue. After the election, I lost. It was a close election. I go and see, there was a lecture in Washington, D.C. on what the Nazis were planning for North Africa. Same concentration camps, extermination work camps, and all of that. And it's opened up so much to what my grandfather and my grandmother and my mother have gone through. And they're just a small number of millions. And we're lucky. Actually, we're very blessed that my grandfather and grandmother and my mother and her sister survived all of that.
You are very blessed.
And my mother talks about the liberation. And when she first saw the Allies, the Americans and British soldiers liberating them, and seeing those Nazis who they were just vicious. She says, there they are with their hands over their heads, all their buttons are taken off when you're prisoners. And she's revealing a lot of things to us that she wouldn't have done, just maybe in fear that somehow we'd ask even more questions about it. So
good for you.
It's been a great revelation. It's one of the best blessings we've had as a family.
How many children do you have?
We have 3.
3 what?
2 girls, 1 boy.
How have they reacted? Now, do you think it's changed them at all? Has it, if I talk to your children, do you think they would have any different self-identity because they now know their father is Jewish?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. It's interesting. Yes, you ask the most probing, interesting questions. Our youngest daughter, who's now in 8th grade, a couple of years ago, she was saying, all right, what are we? And we were at the table, Susan and I. And so I said, well, Etty, my mother, she's French, Italian, and a little Spanish. My father was Scotch, Irish, and Dutch. Susan is half Lithuanian. And she was raised Catholic, and her parents are, their grandfather on that side is a Baptist who's converted to Catholicism. All of them are either Presbyterian or Methodist confirmed. And then I said, and then Etty's grandparents, your great grandparents were Jewish. And so you just could see this is just going through, all right, so what are we? It's just something like this. She says, why? And I said, you're all American. You're all American. And so I think that's really, I don't know if it's the identity, it's already a mix of ethnicities and religious beliefs anyway. And I think that's actually good that they know. Well, I think it's great that they know it. It's just another part of their heritage. Yeah. And also, whenever you have a heritage, Susan being half Lithuanian, which is a little country in the Baltics, and another oppressed group of folks. The same with Latvians. We were in Latvia. The occupation, what happened to Latvians? They're having known what my mother went through, what Jewish people went through, and you see what was happening to people from Latvia and the Baltics that had their independence. The Nazis take over, then the communists take over. They're having to fight in the force and so forth. There is that sympathy and understanding, almost a commiserating with folks who have fought against oppression from forces trying to exterminate them.
In the little time we have left, I want to now ask you 2 substantive issues. For the Jewish community, and again, I think you have a greater insight now because of what your mother's has told you.
Yeah.
For the Jewish people, especially those my age, a little older, the reality of the Holocaust is a constant presence in making Jewish decisions. And so
it should be.
So at the moment, you will hear from within the Jewish world, and certainly from the State of Israel, this horrible concern that a nuclear Iran could lead to another Holocaust. And so the Jew feels that, number one, the Iranian threat is not simply against Israel, but against the West in its entirety, and does in fact threaten the people of the United States. But there is, without question, this greater concern among Israelis and the Israeli government that Iran should never be permitted to have a nuclear weapon now that it has the ideology that it does of extremist Islamic faith, that it has a right to destroy other peoples in their Islamic region, especially Zionists and Jews. So I'm asking you, if you win a seat in the Senate in your election in Virginia, you will have to make certain decisions in the United States Senate, and one might be, do you authorize action against Iran to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon? Can I ask you in general, I know you've thought about this, where do you stand, and what would you say to the audience, both Jewish and not Jewish, watching you now, an American audience? What do you think America's position should be, and what would you like to stand for if you do win a seat back in the Senate?
Number one, it is not that we have Israel's back, as is said. We're side by side. In fact, we ought to be taking the lead, and Israel should have our back, because we're shoulder to shoulder, and the goal is obviously a free, safe, independent Jewish state of Israel, and that's important. If you look at history, again, from this revelation, all of a sudden, stories that I might have ignored in the past, there were Jewish people throughout the Mediterranean, throughout North Africa, and then when the French or the Italians or other countries left there, like my grandparents, once they gave it up, they moved to France. Others moved elsewhere, and then you see those from Russia who were the emigres. So this is not just a theoretical issue. This is borne out from generations. And so when you see these ayatollahs in Iran saying we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, generally speaking, they mean it. And I don't think you ought to think they're joking or bluffing about it. I have a friend who sends me Friday prayers from Tehran. It's important to read what your opposition is saying. And you're exactly right. It seems like about every other prayers is blasting the Zionist Israel and obviously the United States as well. So I think our goal should be, and it must be, that Iran cannot possess nuclear weapons. Look at how adventurous, disruptive, hate-filled, and terror-supporting Iran is presently with Hamas and Hezbollah. Could you imagine how they would behave in the event that they had nuclear weapons? They'd be even more of a problem. They don't necessarily even need a missile technology to deliver a nuclear weapon. This is not only an Israel issue. This is an American issue, and indeed all the rest of the countries in the Middle East, those Gulf states, Qatar, Bahrain, the Saudis, all the rest of them don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons. And so that's where I think we all need to be together. These sanctions need to be real sanctions. And I think that with the SWIFT aspects of them and any of the insurance that might go to any of the steamship lines, all of those sanctions need to be solid. We also need to be supporting those who want to change that regime to get a more free and just society in Iran. When they had those demonstrations a few years ago, there shouldn't have been any question. We're on the side of those who want freedom and justice. I always remember when reading of Natan Sharansky in the Gulag, and he said Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire. He heard that. Somehow they got that information. That heartened them in the Gulag. And so it's important that whether it is, in some cases, covert efforts, and we don't want to talk about those too much, but I think those sort of efforts need to go forward as well. And you never want to take military action off the table. If necessary, if all else fails, that should stay on the table. That is not our first choice. The first choice is truly regime change, preferably from within, and with those who are from outside of Persia, of Iran, who may also want to be in there. And so there's other things that we can do to help those folks. And there's ways of communicating now with the internet and cell phones and all the rest, of communicating with people who do want a freer and just society. And it is ultimately a question of freedom of religion, isn't it? Which is the first freedom, that someone's rights should not be enhanced nor diminished on account of their religious beliefs. That's the issue, not just in the Middle East, in Iran versus Israel, but it's the issue in places like Egypt these days as well.
Governor, do you feel that your community, the people of Virginia, understand the extent to which a nuclear Iran poses a threat to the United States and to the state of Virginia?
I think they do. And you know what I've found, and it's actually good I'm in the Protestant world, people who you may refer to them as evangelicals are every bit as, I shouldn't say every bit as strong as Jewish people are for the state of Israel. But
they are tremendous advocates.
They are tremendous. You go and folks who are strong Christians, Baptists, evangelicals, Protestants, whatever, they are strong with Israel as well. So people say, well, they're conservatives and so forth. Yes, they are, and they're also very strong friends and allies and advocates for Israel. And Israel, in my view, is like a wellspring in the wilderness as far as a friend in the Middle East. It's the only democracy. It's as Prime Minister Netanyahu said just recently in Washington, what a strong, principled leader he is. And he's just saying, well, women don't have any better rights in any other place in the Middle East than in Israel. In fact, Arabs have better rights and better opportunities in Israel than anywhere else. And it's really important we stand with our friends and don't let the enemies of Israel think there's any light between us. And so you stand with your friends. You don't undercut them. You don't tell me how to negotiate from 1967 borders. Having been to Israel, up in the Golan Heights, in those places where the Syrians had those pillboxes and were plinking at the farmers down below, you're thinking, my goodness, you go back to those borders, you're not going to have a secure country. It's hardly secure right now with the rockets that'll come in from Lebanon or from the Gaza. So you make it an even narrow, smaller country? No way. No way.
There are those who've argued from within our own government that Americans do not want to spill the blood of American boys, our treasure, for the state of Israel.
Israel's defense force is fantastic. I mean, pound for pound, person for person, they're as tough as there is anywhere in the country. But it's a little country, and they are technologically advanced, and they have some great defenses and tremendous efforts. However, to have a little country like Israel take on Iran, which is a big country, and then us just sit back and say we have your back, we're going to get blamed for it anyway. And plus it plays right into what these mullahs and ayatollahs are saying, is this is all a religious war. Look, this should not just be Israel versus Iran. And it's not just U.S. and Israel against Iran. The European countries ought to care about it. The other Middle Eastern countries should. And I think it ought to be a concerted effort. That's why these sanctions matter so much. Now, the Russians are making money off the deal, and the Chinese will get oil from wherever they can get it. But Europe, the United States, the civilized world, and maybe the Russians and the Chinese won't be with them. Nonetheless, that can hurt Iran. That can bring down that regime. And then, of course, it's not just bring them down, but substitute it. So my view is that the United States needs to be right shoulder to shoulder with Israel. And what everyone's trying to do with the sanctions and all these various other efforts, and whether they're covert and others, is to make sure that we do not have to shed any blood. Because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, there's going to be a lot of blood being shed and a lot of people leading a less good quality of life.
Governor George Allen, you're a lovely, lovely person, a delightful person. It's been wonderful having a chance to meet with you and talk with you. I wish you all the success in your own election and all your future endeavors, be they personal or professional. And I hope every now and then you'll let me catch up with you and talk to you on Shalom TV.
I'd love to. It's an inspiration and blessing to be with you.
Thank you, Governor.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.